I believe that in cinema, all the elements should work together to make the experience that is closest to the vision of the creator. When something like the cinematography, editing, or sound wants to stand out more, there is usually a dissonance that doesn't let the message or the story be clear. Color and the whole film look is actually one of those things that can easily go wrong. The thing is that there are so many directions, so many possibilities and decisions that can be taken in digital color, that the experience and expression that creators used to have with the most traditional medium, which was film, is oftentimes lost. You can quickly overdo it, attracting too much attention, or the color can get lost and say nothing. It truly is a bit of a paradox because while we have incredible technologies and our cameras are capable of so much quality and realistic images, it seems like the way that color used to speak through actual film in a subtle and magical way, creating something different from the actual way that we look at life and giving color to our memories, all of this is an art that only a few can master. Of course, there's always been ways to continue using film, but the methods are either too expensive or too complicated. The same with trying to replicate the look. You have to know about color science and have some experience with the medium. Or you can try with presets or LUTs, but again, it's so easy to go overboard because you fall into the unlimited possibilities if you do not know what you are trying to replicate. That is why I find Dehancer so incredible, and it truly is like no other film emulation that I have tried. It's a plugin that was originally built for DaVinci Resolve, and it later made its way into Lightroom as a plugin to process photography. Now it's available to several other host applications, and they continue to expand. I have already done another video giving you some thoughts on Dehancer for Lightroom, but now it has finally come out as a Final Cut Pro plugin. I am so excited because I have followed their development and have literally been waiting for this for years. So I'd love to give you a review on my workflow, what to expect from this app, and give you an overview of some of its functions and a couple of personal thoughts. I do have to mention that I like this company so much that I have been in touch with their team giving some feedback, and I also have an affiliate discount code for you. You can use Crazy for Color if you decide to get this app in any of their host applications, and you can get 10% off in this way. There are several ways that you can apply this plugin. A popular one is through an adjustment layer affecting several clips at once, but I personally prefer individually, clip by clip. My work is, for the most part, documentary, where I have little or no control over lighting conditions. So the footage sometimes may have some color casts and I need to do adjustments from shot to shot. I suggest that you add the effect after any other plugin or basic color correction. The answer is found under the Effects panel in the Film Emulation category. Right away, you see the color change with its default settings. Here on the right hand, we have all the controls of the plugin, and we have several modules. I suggest that you go from the top to the bottom. Let me give you an overview of what the process looks like. First, let's uncheck the film grain so that we can see what our plugin is doing step by step. Right now, it's only processing the actual film colors, so if I uncheck this, you can see my raw image. Here in input, we have several camera profiles that may be useful, especially if you are shooting log. In my specific case, I shoot mostly on Rec 709, so I leave it as it is. This module actually is for any basic corrections that you may need to perform on the footage before the actual grade. That is why it may be a good idea to disable the film color here. That way you can fix any white balance issues. Now here in film, we can choose the actual film stock. Let's enable that. And there's so many options, not only from cinema film stocks, but also photographic ones, positive film, even some experimental. All of them are incredible. And from many articles I have read, I know all the dedication and experience that goes into sampling and interpreting all the colors. Honestly, while this is perhaps where the magic starts to happen, I personally just wish there was a better way to navigate between all the options. I mean, their Lightroom plugin does this extremely well, dividing everything in categories and showing a preview of the image like if it was a gallery. So I believe they could do this a little bit more user-friendly. Even if there was a next and previous button, that would make navigation a little bit better. I have mentioned this to their team and they told me that Dehancer works within the limits of Final Cut Pro X. So I do not know if they will ever look for a workaround for this. The results are still incredible. Here we have a push and pull slider. If you have any experience in film, you may know that pushing and pulling is an actual process for shooting and developing film at different ISO values than the ones in which the film itself is rated. Here, I have an ISO 400 film, for example. Imagine that I shoot it as if it was 200 ISO or 1600 ISO. In the results, the contrast may be affected. And this is black and white, but if it was a color film, we would also see some change in the color. Or in some positive film stocks, like Ektachrome, we also see a big change of exposure. So this slider is great for clipping control, aside from the creative choices that it can give you, of course. And by the way, you can always click down here and reset each parameter. Here in Expand, we are already dealing with exposure. But before changing anything, I like to choose a print profile. Basically, Dehancer allows you to emulate all of this as if the image was being printed. Like, we even have the option of photographic paper. Man, isn't that amazing? Each of these options do have a particular color tint, dynamic range, and also in some ways affect the contrast, just as you would expect when transferring from film to a printed image. Here I am using a movie film stock, so I'll just stick with this Fujifilm print option. My image seems quite overexposed, so the first thing I'll do here will be to bring the exposure down. I love the way that Dehancer deals with the exposure change. I mean, if you are coming from a purely digital workflow, you may be annoyed at first because many of the sliders that we change in Lightroom, for example, if we are dealing with exposure, will only affect the brightness. But in a true analog process, brightness is totally connected with color and saturation, which leads to more natural results. So taking that into account, here in Dehancer, you cannot mess up by adding too much saturation with this slider. It's already at its limit. Instead, if you want an image in richer colors, you will soon learn that you can achieve that in a better way by manipulating exposure and contrast. You also have a color density slider, which acts like a vibrance control, affecting only areas of your image without breaking the balance overall. I like to select this analog range limiter, which softens both the brightest and darkest ends of the spectrum, adding more detail to the image. And then I'll figure where I want my black and white point. If you want even more reference for your exposure, you can use the video scopes inside Final Cut, or down there in the plugin, we also have the option of false color. Here we have this overlay of colors telling us which parts of our image are clipping. And this is also very useful for determining the zones where you want skin tones, for example. Now, every time that I do a change, I may go back and change other things, because all the settings in the plugin are interacting with one another. Film grain, for example, once active, may also affect the exposure and the softness of the light. But before I get into that, let me mention this color head tool. In an analog process, one of the ways where you could affect color was using color filters. Dehancer uses its own algorithms to replicate that. I leave all of these sliders only for creative adjustments, unlike the input option where I am just fixing the white balance. If you want even a closer to analog experience, you can bring this preserve exposure slider all the way to the bottom, because in a true analog process, all of those color filters will change, and also they will be affecting exposure. If you leave the slider all the way to the right, Dehancer automatically compensates for it. Let me reset the parameter and just do a very slight adjustment. Now about the film grain. I have never seen more realistic film grain in an application, period. Dehancer is not only applying grain as an overlay layer. Instead, it's recreating each frame of your video with grain itself. The result is truly like nothing else. An important detail to know is that grain in film is connected to the sharpness of the image. The user's manual of Dehancer mentions that the smallest image detail on film cannot be bigger than the grain size, so this film resolution slider is considering this fact. If you feel like it's too soft, you can bring that up with this slider. I personally find that the default setting is a bit too heavy, so I tend to bring down the amount of grain and sharpen a little bit. But I know that the YouTube compression is not the best to show how beautiful this looks, so in this case I will just leave it a little bit higher. You have total control over grain in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. You can even control whether you want your grain to have color or not. Now going down to the next module, we have halation. All of the other things that I have mentioned until now, you can try to somehow recreate in some way using other methods, but I personally have never seen any app that allows you to add this effect, which is unique to film. It's sort of a red or warm halo that happens around areas of a lot of contrast. But in this particular image, I need to use very extreme settings to be able to see it. You can see this warmth affecting the skin tones a bit. Let me go to this image of fireworks that I showed you at the beginning of the video. Let me disable halation. Now you can see its effect. Let's go to another image and paste the same settings that I was using in the makeup shot. With all of this, of course, you should be careful not to overdo it. The next effect, which is bloom, acts in a similar way as a Pro Mist filter. It creates some kind of softness around bright areas, windows, light bulbs. In some images, this will not have a big effect. In others, you have to again be careful not to go too far. This effect seems to go hand in hand with halation, so you may need to adjust one or the other after changing some parameters. Vignette, well, you've probably seen this before. It's useful to direct attention to one area of the frame. And down here there's two effects that recreate the imperfection of film when used in a traditional setting. Film breath refers to those changes in exposure, contrast, and color that sometimes happen randomly. Let me use some extreme settings so that you can see what I mean. It even starts to look like a horror film. Gate wave is another imperfection that you can also find in film, which is the result of the mechanical process of pulling film for playing through a projector. Again, let me show you some extreme settings. I don't see myself using these last two options too much. If you do leave them with their default settings, they are very subtle, and they may have more of a psychological effect on giving the feeling of watching a movie. I think I may play more with them if I want to give the impression of home video, Super 8, or something like that. You can easily copy and paste the effect to other clips, and once you have your look nailed down, you can do some really quick adjustments. After you familiarize yourself with what each tool is doing, you can make a look work fast for something else. I find that Dehancer is not only an amazing tool for getting great results quickly, but it is also great for matching color from different cameras. I have a personal documentary project that I have been working on for some time. I am mostly dealing with footage from mirrorless cameras, but there's been a couple of times that I only had my old iPhone X with me. So that's what I used. I was expecting the color correction and color grading stage to be a bit of a nightmare trying to match everything together. Surprisingly, Dehancer is pretty good for that as well. It kind of puts all of my footage in the same plane, in the same atmosphere, and in the same feel. Honestly, I think that I could still dive deeper into each tool because there's so much going on. It seems like the possibilities are so many, but the difference with this tool compared to others is that you do not get lost. All the creative options that you have here are limited by the analog film medium. In other words, you can totally experiment, but it will be like experimenting in the darkroom. If you have ever done any of that, the results can be quite magical, really. I feel like while Dehancer allows you to process the footage and get results very quickly, it still feels very organic. This is a tool that, in my opinion, closes the gap between the voice and vision of the creator and the whole process of color grading without losing personal expression. Because of that, I am very thankful for the opportunity to have this. Yes, there are small details that could be improved, like the way to deal with the presets organization, or maybe even having presets for grain. That would be great. I think I'd love the option of having a built-in masking tool to have more control over halation and bloom. Oh, and I have to mention that the price is not very cheap. The Pro version, which I'll show you today, is $399, which may be a bit too much if you only do this as a hobby. But there is absolutely nothing in the market that comes close to what the Dehancer can do. If you are interested, you can download the trial and check it out. And don't forget to use the discount code CRAZY4COLOR if you decide to go for it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon, guys.